Sonic the Hedgehog 3. This is a movie that came out today. The third point on the triangle. Wait, no, that's Zelda. Is that Sega? It's Nintendo? Ah, they're gonna sue me, won't they? Anyway, Sonic. I made a video like 4 years ago making Sonic, which got me a very nice amount of views, but that old Sonic isn't really up to standard. Also, there are more characters. I'd like to make a video that isn't a minute and 30 seconds long. Starting off, I need a height reference. Now these guys are tiny, with most of them standing at around 3 feet. I took out my Ryan Reynolds Deadpool again. That video got a lot of views, and I really need to capitalize off that. You don't have to make them the same size. This should be generally easy to scale up to the size you'd like. I just have a strong hate for myself in everything I do. I try to cut out the body. I neglect the head for now because it's going to be more difficult to do. This time I gave him fingers and feet. I got curious if he had beige bottoms on his feet, but wasn't willing to look up Sonic feet, so I'm just doing the full blue. Because I'm not a freak, I won't be adding toes. You can if you want. Weirdo. Now I just sew it together. After sewing it together, I don't like it. Like, it's good. It's just weird. I don't like looking at it. Here are the gloves. I almost never start working on the clothing elements before finishing the body, but this time I don't really care. I sew them together. I put the gloves on Sonic, then fold them down. Next, the shoes. Here's the cutout. You'll need to accurately measure them to his feet, then cut out 2 of each of these. First, I sew the white band over the front of the shoe, then the sole to the front of the shoe. I attach the back to the shoe. Sonic's got socks, so I cut out those. They're easy because they're just bands. Then I sew them to the shoe and flip them down. Lastly, I paint a little gold down the shoe. That's the body. No, it isn't. I haven't done the tail, and the back spikes. I move on to the head anyway. This is the part of the last one where I feel I was the weakest, so I really would like to improve and make it look more like the character this time. I cut out the face, then sew together the triangles at the top and bottom. Do this twice, then sew both sides of the head together. Then I stuff it. I cut out this mouthpiece. If for some reason you're curious why I put slits, it's because it helps to make the cutouts more 3D. I sew the slit triangle things, then attach it to his face. Next, I cut out the eyes and sew them right above the snout area. Next, I cut out the nose, then sew it to the face. Using these paints, I paint the eyes on with a sewing pin. Next, I add the spikes onto the back of his head. If I mess these up, I'm going to be fuming. Here's the first head spike. It goes at the top of the head. Next is the middle back spikes. The other 4 back spikes are all the same. They need to be sewn different though, depending on which side it's done on. After sewing on each of the spikes, I sew the mouth with thread. Funny enough, I nearly forgot to add the ears, so I sew those on. With the head finished, I sew on the rest of the body. He's almost done, but he needs some back spikes and a tail. I cut out the back spikes. There's only 2 of them. Then sew them to the body. Now for the final piece, the tail. I cut out the tail, then fold and sew it together. Then to the body. That's it. Sonic is all done. Now for Tails. What is this? Why is he that big? Sonic's already like 3 feet tall. This guy's gotta be at least like 2 feet. Why is he so little? Is this guy like a baby? Is he baby years old? He's so small. Now, Tails is a yellowish goldish color, which is a bit strange, but for some reason, I actually have felt in that color. I start off with the body. I made it a bit bigger than I think it should be because I don't want to struggle with an itty bitty teeny tiny body. I sew the body together the same as Sonic. Once the base is finished, I add fur on his belly. Then I make the gloves. I do this the same way as the Sonic gloves. Then I make the shoes. Again, in a similar way. Tails has a big white part on the front of his shoes, so I cut that out. I cut out the sole and sew it to the toe cap. Then I cut out the back of the shoe and sew it on. Then the tongue of the shoe. All I've got to do now is cut out the socks and sew them onto the shoes. Next for the body, I do the tails. I cut out the tail and then I cut the tip off and replace it with white. I sew each tip on, then sew the tips together. Then I do the bottom and stuff it as I sew the top. Then I attach the tails to the body. Now for the head. I start the same as Sonic by cutting out the head, then sewing together the triangles and sewing it together. Then I stuff the head. As opposed to doing the face first, I make the ears, then the tuft on the top of his hair. I sew those cutouts to the top of his head, then move lower. Firstly, I sew on the snout. Then the tufts of hair on the sides of it. Finally, I add the eyes. Once all that is done, I sew the head to the body. Now I have this. Next, I paint the eyes and the nose on. I add this black rim around the eyes that I think kinda messes it up, but it's fine because I'll fix it later. And that's it for Tails. Now I move on to Knuckles. For Knuckles, I have all the pieces of the body cut out. If you're smart, you may have realized that there might be a pattern between the making of these bodies. If so, you'll know that I sew the body together the same way. It's nice that Knuckles is the biggest because it's much easier to make than that twink Tails. I quickly sew the body together, then I sew the white crescent on the front of his chest. Then I look to the back and add his weird little tail. Unlike my other Sonic characters, I'm just doing the detail on his head for now. I cut out the snout, then sew the triangles. I then cut out the eyes and sew them on. Then I paint the eyes and nose on. Once it's dry, I cut out the weird little spikes that go down his head and sew them to his head. With the body done, I start working on the shoes. I firstly sew the yellow and red parts together, then sew that piece to the sole. Then I cut out and attach the back of his shoes. Finally, for the tongue of the shoe. Now I can move on to Knuckles. I cut out these 4 triangles, then sew them together into smaller triangles. Then I put a plastic piece inside them so they're sturdy. A pipe cleaner or wire of some sorts would have the same effect. I sew the spikes to the hands, then cut out the gloves. I sew the gloves the same way as always, but when I put them on Knuckles, I make sure to get it as good as possible before cutting the holes in the gloves for his spikes. Then I cut triangles out for the spikes on the gloves. I sew them the same way by folding them, then sew them to the gloves, and that's it. Knuckles is finished. Now all that's left is Shadow. For the actual body, it's the same as the Sonic one. Like the exact same. Try and trace the Sonic body if you can. That's how I made him. Sewing it together is also pretty much the same. I'll speed through it right now. Once the body's finished, you can detail it. First, I add the white chest hair. I use a soft fabric for it. This is optional. Then comes the shoes and gloves. You're going to want the hand part, then the band around the wrist. The wrist is black. Once sewn, you can put the glove on. Next, the shoes. Here are the 4 core pieces you'll need. The 2 red pieces are the sole of the shoe, which you'll sew together like this. Then sew the white part along the sole like this. After all that, add the last piece to the back. Next, you want to cut out this red piece and put it on the front of the ankle. The rest of these details I'm going to do with paint. Using this gold metallic puff paint, I paint the thick gold rings around the wrists and ankles. Despite the body not being finished, I'm going to move on to the head. It's the same as Sonic, where I have 2 pieces and then I sew the triangles and sew the sides together. Next is the snout. I sew the triangles, then sew the face. Before closing it, I stuff it. Then I make the nose. Same way I've made all the noses, by cutting it out, folding it, and sewing it. Then attach it to the face. Next I do the mouth. The mouth is simple and easy. It's just thread. Next I cut out the eyes. I sew the eyes on, then I give him eyebrows. I also paint the irises in. Now I have to give evil Mickey Mouse his spikes. Starting at the top spike, it's the same as Sonic's. 3 pieces. Each head spike has a red stripe along it, so I sew that to the forehead. Next is the bottom back head spikes. I sew both sides together for those, then stuff them. Unlike Sonic, I add the red stripe, then sew them to the back of the head. Now for the 4 big spikes on his head. Unlike Sonic, these are pointing upwards as opposed to down. Remember to sew them the way it's layered here, or else it won't face the correct way on the head. Once it's sewn and stuffed, you can add the stripes. Then sew them to the head. All that's left is the back, and 1 face detail. Oh my god, I forgot the ears again. There, ears. Then I paint the red on the top of the eyes. Now for the back spikes. These, unlike Sonic, again, point upwards. They're made the same way as the other ones have been. After that, I add the final piece, the tail. And that's it. Shadow. That's it for my Sonic 3 Plush tutorial. Hopefully this guide was helpful enough to show you or even assist you in making your own Sonic characters. I've got an Instagram that I'm on pretty often, so I'd recommend if you've made any of these to send them to me on there because I'd love to see your creations. Have a good day and goodbye.